Just, um, and please remain on mute during the presentation. If you have any questions, please put it in the chat box or use your hand option, and then I'll give the floor to you before muting yourself. Thank you. All right. So good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Thank you to each and every one of you for being here with us today. Before we start, Future Black Female would like to acknowledge the land on which we gather. It is the traditional territory of Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon, One Plume Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people, and acknowledging remind us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous people. My name is Lenka Rakose. I am the bilingual career and education counselor at Future Black Female. I'm very pleased to be able to welcome you for the second part of this mental health series. Future Black Female is a feminist-informed organization that mobilizes Black female youth aged from 16 to 22 to rise up and pursue better outcomes in academic, socioeconomic, political, and civic arenas. And we do this by providing access to strong networks, skill development and advancement, and right-based advocacy. Since 2019, Future Black Female has successfully launched and implemented various projects in partnership with other organizations. Our portfolio includes a global AC contest, a COVID response program, a remote social media internship, a building STEM capital conference, a pro-Black mental health services focusing specifically on gender-based violence and others. As we just concluded the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, Future Black Female had joined the word in this campaign by kicking off the second part in our speaker series focused on gender-based violence. The aim of this workshop is to bring awareness to myths and misconceptions of intimate partner violence, including the difference with domestic violence. We will have the opportunity to listen to Roxanne Francis, an award-winning registered social worker, psychotherapist, consultant, speaker, and a media mental health expert who has been helping people access tools to change their lives for over 10 years. Ms. Francis is the owner of Francis Psychotherapy and Consulting Services, where she provides psychotherapy to individuals and different communities, clinical supervision to other therapists, and consultation to various organizations, addressing topics such as mental health in the workplace, diversity, equity, and inclusion, burnout, children's mental health, and parenting and women's issues. Her presentation will be followed by an open discussion focused on intimate partner violence. And before concluding my introduction, on behalf of Future Black Female, I would like to thank the Government of Canada, specifically the Women and Gender Equality Canada, and the Canadian Women's Foundation for the support that enable us to deliver the mental health sessions. Thank you very much again for joining this second conference of our series, and let us welcome Roxanne Francis. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. That was very nice of you, Linka. I appreciate it. Good evening, everyone. It is indeed my pleasure to be here this evening, and I hope that as we have our discussion, that this information will be helpful to you, that you will find it to be enlightening, and I welcome any questions throughout the presentation. We can definitely have a Q&A or question and answer period towards the end, but I'd really like for this to be an engaging time. So if you have any questions or thoughts, I would encourage you to just put that in the chat, and Linka, maybe you can help me to just monitor the information that's in the chat, or if anyone has any questions, because I might not be able to see all the questions as I am presenting.
Noted.
Thank you. So I will be sharing my screen and starting the sharing of information. Okay. So tonight we're going to be talking about intimate partner violence, the myths and misconceptions. And this is the first of three moments where I'll be sharing information with you on this topic. So tonight will not be exhaustive. I will not be sharing all the things that there are to share about intimate partner violence, but tonight is just the first of three. So we will get started. Okay. So let's start with the myths. What are some things that you have heard about intimate partner violence or gender-based violence? I will start sharing some of the things that I have heard, and maybe you can share some of the things that you've heard if they're not listed here. Things like only poor or uneducated women are victims of violence. That is not true, right? People who are highly educated, people who are very well resourced, people with lots of money, are also victims of violence. Violence does not discriminate. It really does permeate through all levels and different segments of society, and it really doesn't discriminate based on race either. It impacts just about every area or every segment in our society. The interesting thing, one of the reasons that people think that poor women or uneducated women are victims of violence is because these are generally the segments of society that are accessing resources such as shelters for abused women, so to speak, or certain kinds of funding to help women escape violence. What tends to happen is that people who are much more resourced, people who have a lot of money, don't generally use these services that are available to the general public because they tend to have enough money to keep it out of the public eye, and they can go to a different area in the community. They can maybe go to the family cottage, or they can do other things that does not require them to access the publicly funded services that are available. So it would cause us to think that only poor women or women who don't have a high level of education are victims of violence, but that is actually just not true. So the other myth is that victims provoke or deserve the violence that they experience. Again, that's not true. Regardless of whether or not you started the argument, or regardless of whether or not you were told that you've done something to provoke the violent behavior, the truth of the matter is the onus or the blame, if you will, the responsibility really does lie on the person who has perpetuated the violence. No one deserves violence. And even if someone is, for want of a better phrase, provocative, they do not ask or heap violence upon themselves. The onus is upon the perpetrator to exercise self-control, really. All right, the other myth says only women who live with their partner experience violence. Again, this is completely untrue. And we'll talk, I have some statistics to share a little bit later. We'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. But it is not only women who live in a home with their partner who experience violence. It may seem that way because when you are living in close quarters, when you're living within the same confines of a home, then you are experiencing each other on a much more frequent basis, and there is a likelihood that violence will occur more readily or more often. But the idea that you have to live with someone in order to experience violence actually isn't true. And what actually happens is it causes people who are dating or people who are not living in the same home with their partner to feel like, well, what's happening to me isn't actually violence because we don't live together. And so people don't self-identify that they're actually experiencing abuse in their relationship because they think that we're just dating, or we only go to school together, or we're not living together, or we're not married. So that does not speak to our situation or speak to my situation, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Another point, another myth or misconception is that victims of violence have low self-esteem or mental health issues. Again, another myth, that's not true. Again, back to the point, or similar to the point of, only poor women are victims of violence. It may seem that those who have violence perpetrated against them have low self-esteem, or people would think that if you're a confident person, that this can't happen to you. This very much can happen to you. This kind of behavior or being on the receiving end of this kind of violent behavior, it permeates through all levels of society and all kinds of self-perception, whether you have low self-esteem or whether you're confident, whether you have mental health issues or whether you don't. And yes, while it is true that those who have low self-esteem and those who do have mental health issues experience violence at a higher rate than the rest of the population, it does not mean that the rest of the population does not experience gender-based violence. Okay, another misconception, only adult women experience violence. And it's very important for me to debunk that myth right now, because if you are here watching live or watching later at 15, 16, 17 years old, thinking that what I'm experiencing is not abuse because I'm not 35, because I'm not in my 40s or I'm not in my late 20s. Actually, abuse in relationships can happen when you're a teenager. It can happen before you even get to high school. And so it is very, very important to point these things out so that should this begin to happen to you, you can identify it and begin to get the help that you need. And the other myth that I want to share with you tonight is if it does not count if you're not being beaten or hurt physically. And at the next topic, the next time I join you, I'll be talking about the different kinds of abuse, but it is definitely not just physical abuse. You can be hurt in multiple different ways, and it isn't just because you don't have a bruise that would say that you're not being abused. Violence can happen in different forms, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be hit or you have to be beaten up or you have to be hurt physically. It's very, very important to understand that there are different kinds of abuse and there's different ways within which we can experience violence. All right, let's see what it says here. Okay, so next slide. All right, so let's look at the term domestic violence. This is usually what people talk about when they say abuse or they talk about intimate. Actually, people rarely say intimate partner violence. I'm really hoping that people begin to say that more. But quite often people consider, it's just a bit of a mouthful. I don't want to say all that. I'll just say domestic violence. There's a problem with the term domestic violence. And you might think, why, Roxanne? It's just a phrase. Why can't we say domestic violence? Well, the truth of the matter is that the term domestic isn't necessarily the best term. It causes us to believe that, sorry, I'm just gonna go back for one quick second. Okay, so the term domestic, it causes us to think that this is something that can only happen in the home. This is something that can only happen within a living situation. So I came back to this slide because it spoke to people who live in the home, and domestic seems to point to the idea that you have to be in a living situation. You have to be in a in-home situation, in a marriage, in a common law arrangement in order for violence to happen. And that couldn't be further from the truth. You can be in a violent situation, again, if you're dating. You can be in a violent situation at school. You can be in a violent situation walking home from the park or in the parking lot at the movies. The problem with the term domestic is that people seem to think that once you go inside and you close the door, then people on the outside have nothing to do with that. And so it creates it creates danger for the person who's experienced the violence, because people seem to think, well, that's none of our business. That's between them. That's domestic. That's only between the wife and the husband. That's only between the two spouses. That's only between those people living in their home. That's their business. We're going to close the door and forget about it. And that causes a huge, huge problem for people who are experiencing violence because they have a hard time accessing support. I've heard time and time again about people who are living within a home situation and someone is experiencing violence and they call the police. And police come to the door and they say, well, it's a domestic situation, so I'm going to let you guys work that thing out. And then they leave. The problem with that is it creates, a more dangerous environment for the person who actually had to call the police. So if the police don't lay charges, if they don't ask the perpetrator to leave the home or arrest the perpetrator and take them away, if they just say, keep it down or don't disturb the neighbors or you guys can work it out, and then they leave, it gets so much more dangerous for the person who is living inside the home. So it's very, very important that we take off the label domestic and we call it for what it actually is, which is intimate partner violence. It's the violence that happens between individuals in a relationship. And I just want to skip to that slide around what it actually means, the term intimate partner violence. It's the harm that is caused by an intimate partner. And does that mean you have to be in a sexual relationship? No. It means intimate in terms of the kind of relationship that you're having with that person. So it's not a sibling relationship. It's not a parent relationship, but it's more of a romantic relationship. So whether it is that you just met on Tinder and then you decided to meet for the first time, whether it is that you are only in a sexual relationship, or maybe you're just dating and the relationship hasn't yet gotten physical. But it's very important to know that as long as there's violence between the two parties, then it's classified as intimate partner violence. And no, you do not have to be living in the same home. You can be living in the same home. You can be in a marriage. You can be a common law relationship. But as long as there's a relationship. And the other thing to keep in mind is that violence can happen after the relationship has ended. I can't tell you how many women I have worked with who have finally left the violence in the relationship. They've gone on, or they're trying to move on with their lives. And the perpetrator or the violent party in the relationship will find them and either engage in successfully assaulting them or attempt to do so, or engage in stalking type behavior, which is extremely disturbing and mentally stressful. Sorry, I just noticed. Okay, I just thought there was some chatter in the chat and I want to make sure that I don't miss it. Okay, any questions about what I've said so far? No? Okay. So let me just move on to the next slide. Okay, so let's look at some statistics. Statistics Canada shares that violence against women actually peaks at age 15. Let me know if you're surprised by that statistic. Because again, a lot of people believe that intimate partner violence happens when you are in your late 20s. It happens when you are in your 30s or beyond that, in your 40s and older. Not recognizing that this actually can start in high school. This can start with that person that you have that crush on in your math class, right? This can happen when you're on lunch. This can happen after school when you're walking home from school, right? This is not something that is exclusive to individuals who are older or married. Okay, so another statistic. Police reported incidents are 4 times higher for women than there are for men. So I just want to place a caveat here, or a disclaimer, that men also experience intimate partner violence. It is not, and I'm speaking in binary terms, but you know, it is not that it doesn't happen to men. It is reported less often. It is disclosed less often. And as it relates to gender-based violence, which is violence that tends to happen to individuals who do not to individuals who don't identify as male. So individuals who identify as women, as queer, as trans, or non-binary, it tends to happen at 4 times a rate higher than it does for individuals who identify as men. And there are multiple reasons for that. One, which is, I guess, the most obvious reason, or people who identify as men are generally seen as stronger in our society, or generally seen as individuals who can put up more of a defense. They are generally they generally have more resources available to them, usually more financial resources, usually more of, I guess, a physically stronger community behind them for support. Women tend to, for want of a better phrase, women are seen as the weaker sex. It's not something that I ascribe to, but it's something that is thought of in the society. And so it is seen as though women are defenseless, right? They don't have as many resources. Women generally have children around them and are not as capable of escaping. Women are often, as well in our society, more dependent on others. So if women are in a relationship or in a partnered relationship, then they're generally more dependent on the other party. And while this isn't necessarily true all the way across the board, again, I'm speaking in general terms, these are generally the numbers that you see in the statistics. The other numbers to pay attention to say that women living in rural areas encounter intimate partner violence at almost twice the rate of those in the cities. Does anyone want to give a thought as to why you think that might be? Any thought as to why women in rural areas are at almost twice at risk for intimate partner violence than those in the cities?
Someone said isolation.
Isolation, yes, 100%, 100%. When you are in the rural areas, then, by the feature of it being rural, first of all, you can't just run next door, right? I live in a more urban area, and if something happens in my home, I can quickly run next door and call for help. Or I might have a phone available to me right away. The internet is easily accessible. There's Wi-Fi all over the place, right? When you're in a rural setting, next door might be a couple miles down the street, right? Or you might not have access as easily to the internet or to cell phone service. Not only that, but you don't have access to your network of people who can support you as quickly. If something happens in my home, I can easily gather a number of neighbors or girlfriends or family members around me very, very easily, and they can be at my home in a moment's notice. That isn't necessarily true for individuals who live in rural communities. And one of the features of a violent aggressor or an abusive partner is that person's likelihood of engaging in isolation. And again, I'll speak about that more in the next rollout of this series. But those who engage in abusive behavior tend to have a calling card of isolating their partner. So they often say, no, you can't hang out with your friends, or no, I don't want you hanging out with your family, or move away with me to this rural area. If you don't move away with me, then you don't love me, right? And so pulling someone away from their network, pulling them away from the people who are close to them, pulling them away from the people that they might use as a resource when things get difficult, is a marker of being in an abusive relationship. And so as a result of that, people who live in rural areas, they don't have the support. Not only the support of friends and family, but the support of community agencies. When you live in an urban area, there are community centers, there are government-run support agencies, there are shelters where you can go overnight. There's a place that can keep your children if they need that service. When you are in a rural area, those places are a lot less available to you. In an urban area, if I'm feeling unsafe, I can call an Uber. I can get in a taxi, and I can, easily, quickly call a taxi and get to my best friend's place, or my mother's place, or my sister's place to keep myself safe. But if you are in the middle of a country, calling a taxi is highly unlikely. And so those individuals are at a lot greater risk of encountering intimate partner violence. So as I had alluded to earlier, private residence homes tend to have a higher rate of intimate partner violence. 84% of intimate partner violence that's reported happens in a private residence. And that's specifically because the residence is private. The door is closed, right? We go in, we close our doors, we don't engage as much as a community. We live isolated lives, and that can be a little bit dangerous if you are in an abusive relationship. The other thing to note is that while a lot of these statistics speak to the incidents that have been reported, it is important to know that many of the intimate partner violent incidents actually don't get reported to the police. And I wonder if you can, I wonder if you have any thoughts. Maybe you can throw it in the chat or put your hand up and unmute yourself. Do you have any thoughts as to why a lot of these incidents do not get reported to the police? Any thoughts as to why some of these incidents don't get reported to the police?
Someone say fear of retaliation.
Yes, fear of retaliation is a big one. It's a big one. And I'll explain a little bit about that. It really is just very self-explanatory, right? If you call the police or you report the incident to the police, then if the perpetrator doesn't end up being charged, or they don't end up being locked away, then they eventually come back home. And there might be retaliation when they come back home. Or their family might retaliate, or their friends might retaliate. What tends to happen is that individuals who are abusive, they tend to be very charming. And so the rest of the community might not believe or might not be aware that that person is abusive. And so when you call the police or you make a report about abusive behavior towards you from this person, people in the community, sometimes they turn against the victim. Sometimes they will say, such and such is just making up stories or looking for attention or trying to get money or trying to discredit so-and-so. And it can be really, really shameful. It can be very disheartening. And so sometimes, many times, individuals do not report incidents to the police. Another reason why people don't report the incidents to the police is that oftentimes they are almost in disbelief that this has happened, and they very much believe in the longevity of the relationship or the future of the relationship. And so people will say things like, well, you know, I want my marriage to work, or I want this relationship to last. And so maybe if I just stick it out or I don't report it, then we can work it out, right? Or if I just apologize, then we can work it out. If I can just get the baby to stop crying at night, then I won't get hurt. And people are very reluctant because they have so much hope in the person and so much hope in the relationship. Another reason that people don't report the incident to the police is because they are in love, back to hoping for the relationship, but not just that. They want to have the loving attention of their partner, or they don't want to rob any children who are in the relationship of their father, right? They don't want to rob the children of a father figure. Another reason that people do not report incidents to the police, and this is specifically to the Black community, we are in a time of what I would call racial reconciliation. We are in a time where people are saying Black Lives Matter. We are in a time where people are trying to support Black businesses and ensure that Black individuals get an education and get access to capital in the community. And people are worried that if we report this violence to the police, then another Black man might go to jail. And individuals will say things to me in therapy like, I don't want to be responsible for having to send another brother to jail, right? And so there is this idea of preserving our community by ensuring that you are not the one responsible for police putting handcuffs on another Black person. What will happen to this Black person when they go to jail, right? I'm robbing this person of their future. If they go to jail and they serve time, this is going to be something on their record, and it's going to prevent them from being successful, and it will be my fault. And so many people don't report these incidents to the police for these reasons and many more. Okay, so I want to share with you that intimate partner violence is not like the movies, right? We have a script, so to speak, if you will, that Hollywood, the society, romance novels, comedies, Netflix, they've all sold us this story of what abusive relationships might actually look like, right? And it kind of goes like this, girl meets boy or partner, and they fall in love. Partner starts yelling at this person. They eventually beat her up. And the beat up is usually quite severe. She either escapes and learns how to fight, or she goes and gets her family who, they rally the troops and they come back, and this person is either arrested and taken to jail where they serve a lengthy jail time, or this person gets beaten up by the family or by the girl herself, right? And then the perpetrator goes away for good, and this young woman lives happily ever after, and she can pursue a life that is happy. And it doesn't always work like this. As a matter of fact, it rarely ever works like this. And it's difficult for me to tell you exactly how it works, because one relationship will never look like the other. And so there are multiple ways in which this can actually work. In some cases, it's not like a grown woman will meet another grown person and they get into a relationship. Sometimes like, as I mentioned, it happens in high school, where the boy might start pushing the girl around, or a girl might meet another girl and they start a relationship and she starts calling her names, right? It can be, you know, putting someone's appearance down and going from there. And so it tends to work in like a snowball effect. It never generally starts with, let's go on a date and then I'm going to punch you. That's generally not how it works, right? It generally starts really small and gradually works its way up. And so it's very important to recognize that it's not like the movies. Many, many years ago, not that many, I want to say maybe 10 or 12 years ago, Jennifer Lopez had filmed this movie called Enough. Feel free to Google it. And it was about a woman who had met this man and they were in this beautiful relationship. And eventually he starts to become physical with her. And then he started beating her up really, really badly. And she escaped and she learned how to become a mixed martial arts fighter. And eventually their paths crossed again and they got into this big fight. And she eventually beat him up and she went on to live happily ever after. It doesn't work like this. A lot of women, they usually don't leave in one go when it comes to these relationships. Oftentimes, you would leave the relationship and then you come back. And then you leave again and then you come back. Statistics actually say that it takes 4 to 5 times of trying to leave the abusive relationship before you actually leave for good. And this isn't like giving you a license to say, I should just stay because it takes a long time to leave. No, if you're in an abusive relationship, you need to try your best to ensure your safety and try to extricate yourself from that as safely as you can. But just know that if you leave the relationship and you come back, there's nothing wrong with you. You are not to blame. You are not to feel embarrassment or shame. This is generally the pattern and generally how it works. Also, too, when someone leaves the relationship, that is often a time that is very, very volatile when you need to keep people around you to ensure your safety, because a person that you have left becomes very, very angry that you have left. And it is a time where you are more likely actually to be hurt more than any time when you were in the actual relationship. The other thing too is that oftentimes when women leave these relationships, these individuals that they have left, because they're unwilling to give up control, they will start to engage in stalking type behavior, following them to work, following them to school, sitting behind them at lunchtime, following them to their part-time job, waiting for them in the parking lot. These are behaviors that you need to be aware of if these things happen to you, and try to get some support around you and try to get the police involved if you can. Also, too, the other thing that I will say is that it does not usually result in happily ever after. Oftentimes when you leave an abusive relationship, there's a lot of confusion involved. There's a lot of sadness involved. Yes, sadness. You would think that after you leave an abusive relationship that you'd be quite happy, but there are a lot of mixed emotions. There is a measure of sadness and relief, but there is a measure of, there's a measure of happiness and relief, and there's a measure of sadness and grief. Sadness that I can't believe that this happened for so long, or I can't believe that the relationship is over, or I can't believe that we're not going to get married like I wanted to, or I can't believe that I had to separate from my children's father, right? So it isn't always sunshine and roses once the relationship is over. Okay, so I want to share that oftentimes when people look from the outside, they look at people's relationships that might be abusive and they think to themselves, well, that could never be me. I would never allow that to happen. I'm too strong for that. I would put up a fight. I would never allow them to hit me. That could never happen to me. And that's actually a photograph of myself. And not that I was in a similar situation, but I share because my own mother was in a relationship when she was in her very early 20s. And she's a very strong woman. She doesn't put up with any foolishness. And she had always thought that that couldn't be me. And even to this day, she would say things like, that couldn't be me. However, when she was in a relationship in her 20s, there was a man that she was involved with, and they got into an argument, and before she knew it, he was trying to put his hands on her. And they got into a fight. They got into a physical fight. She defended herself, and they got into a big physical altercation, and eventually she extricated herself from the relationship, and she left, and she never looked back. But when her and I speak about this, she says things like, I would never allow that to happen. And I would say to her, but Mom, it actually did happen. Even those of us who feel very confident, even those of us who feel like we have financial resources, even those of us who feel like we come from families who would support us fiercely, sometimes find ourselves in relationships where people try to harm us, because there is absolutely no conclusive way of telling if your partner might harm you, because you don't live in their minds. You don't know what's going on. You don't have all the details of their past. You don't know what their ability to their anger management processes are like. And so while you may even have protective factors, which are the things that would prevent you from being in an abusive relationship, even though you might have resources available to you, there is no way of telling whether or not your partner might try to harm you. And oftentimes when this happens, you're blindsided completely, or you're taken by surprise in a way that my own mother was, right? You cannot believe that this is actually happening. Like, oh my goodness, what is actually happening to me here? And we often feel like if I was in that situation, I would know exactly what to do. I would do this and I would do that. And oftentimes you are so taken by surprise when this happens to you that sometimes you don't know what to do. You are completely tongue-tied. That confident person that you think and know of yourself to be, you can't find that person. It's like you're so shocked that you're shocked into inaction, and you're shocked into fear. And so while we might feel like that could never happen to me, I want you to understand that this can happen to absolutely anyone. And I just want to share that there is absolutely no shame. Again, back to, I think it was the first slide, which said that this is not your fault. You are not the one to blame. And so there's nothing to be ashamed of. The feeling of shame states that where it comes from is from the idea that I'm a bad person, right? And you've nothing to be ashamed of because you didn't do anything bad. You're not a bad person. This is something that has actually happened to you. And in our society, we have a lot of people who look onto these relationships and say things like, it couldn't happen to me. And so you feel shame, and we feel as though we should have been able to prevent this, as though I should have been able to stop this from happening to me. And so there is something wrong with me. There's actually nothing wrong with you. You are not broken, and there is no way that you could have prevented this, or there's no way that you could have told, there's no way that you could have foretold that this could happen to you. Any thoughts or questions here? Okay. Oops. All right, so I want to talk about the cycle of abuse. This is a very important slide. I'm going to take my time in just discussing this piece. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but abuse tends to happen in a cyclical fashion, right? So what tends to happen is that there is this, let's start from this period of tension. When you find yourself in a relationship with someone who is abusive, whether or not they're physically abusive or they're abusive in different ways, whether or not you live with them or they live in a different home from you, whether or not you're in your 20s or 30s, or whether or not you're 15 or 18, it still tends to take this general pattern. So there's a tension where there is stress, either from the pressures of daily life or arguments that you might have, or some kind of disagreement, whether or not they arrived early or you arrived late, or they expected you to wear a skirt and you're wearing pants, or you're wearing heels and they want you to wear flats. Regardless of whatever the point of contention is, there's something that causes contention in a relationship. And you can tell that your partner is simmering. There's something that's simmering under the surface. And because you don't want to have the explosive incident, what tends to happen is that you start to walk on eggshells. You start to tread very, very lightly and very, very carefully, because you do not want for there to be an explosion. You are trying to, you're basically bending over backwards, trying to ensure that you're doing all the right things, that you're not upsetting them. You're trying to do everything to make them happy. You try to reduce tension by being very agreeable, by doing all the things that they like. However, because abuse is not something that is caused by you, regardless of how wonderful your behavior is, there will eventually be what is called the explosion or the abusive incident. And this is where the abuse occurs, whether it's physical abuse or verbal abuse, but it includes an outburst of anger. Often it includes threats, some other kind of abuse, but it's the big incident, right? After the big incident, when the abuser calms down and sees now that their partner is hurt, that they're crying, that they're embarrassed, then what happens is that the abuser apologizes. They show remorse. Sometimes, the flowers and the chocolate happens. Sometimes it's let's go out on lavish dates. Sometimes it's purchasing jewelry or lavish gifts, right? Because what happens in abusive relationships is that an abuser cannot exist unless they have someone to abuse. And so when the explosive incident happens or the abusive incident happens, they're worried that their partner might actually leave. And so they are doing everything to ensure that the person does not leave. And sometimes even in the apology, you might hear things like, if you'd only cleaned the kitchen floor when I'd asked you, this would not have happened. Or, why did you have to go and buy lunch with that other boy? Then I wouldn't have had to yell at you. And sometimes even in the midst of the apology, there is some blaming that's happening. However, there is the apology. They shower you with love and affection, and they promise you get the promise that this will never, ever, ever happen again. Most often, there is this remorseful phase, and it's often called the honeymoon phase. Now, after the honeymoon phase, the abuse generally tends to stop or it slows down. The relationship seems happy again, right? You're dating again, you're having dinners together again, you're going for long walks again, you're holding hands again. And oftentimes, this is where the victim or the abused person holds out hope. Oh my goodness, they're changing. They have professed their undying love and affection for me, and things are only going to get better. And often when people who love the victim or the abused person, when they are aware that there's abuse happening in the relationship, they get very, very frustrated at this stage, because the abused person, it's like they fall in love all over again. And then they decide, well, I'm not going to leave because they've changed. And so it can be really, really challenging for people who want to support the person who's in the abusive relationship, because after the abusive incident happens, the abused person will call their loved ones and say, I can't believe this happened. I want to leave, or I'm considering leaving. But then the honeymoon phase sweeps in, the calm sweeps in, and then we fall in love all over again. and we decide we're not going to leave, we're going to stay because this time it's different. This time it's going to be better. But that time is often short-lived, right? In the calm, the abuser might continue to ask for forgiveness. They make lots of positive gestures. They do the things that you want them to do, and you get so much hope for the relationship. But again, it is short-lived before something happens and the tension starts building again, and then we go right back around, right? It's important to be aware of this cycle of abuse so that you can see if this happens in your own relationships. You can see if this is happening in the relationships of your friends. You can see if this is happening in the relationships of your family members. If you go to Google and you Google cycle of abuse, you might see something very, very similar to this. I'm actually actively working with a woman who is in an abusive relationship. And so she has been coming to therapy for a number of months. And a lot of things have happened over the course of these months where, he hasn't necessarily been physically abusive to her, but he has been violent in the home. And she's a young woman, she's 21 years old. And she actually was thinking that this cannot be an abusive relationship because I am so young, right? This cannot be an abusive relationship because I am not married. But they did move in together, and her partner was quite violent. And, she finally had the opportunity to leave a number of weeks ago. And we had a session a couple of days ago, actually. And I was talking to her, I was reminding her of this cycle. We've talked about it before. And I was reminding her of this cycle. And she actually said to me, I don't think we even had a honeymoon phase. We would have the tension, we would have the explosion, but he never apologized, right? We would just go back to calm, where we just go back to normal as though it never happened. And we would be having meals together, we would go grocery shopping and do all the things. And then something would happen and the tension would build. And so when the very first time that I spoke to her about the cycle of abuse, she thought that this did not relate to her because it did not have the honeymoon phase. And so I just want to bring that to your attention, that while this is kind of like a template, it doesn't have to look exactly like this, because abuse really is abuse, whether or not it has the 4 pieces of the cycle. Any questions about this? Okay. I am going to skip to the next slide. If you have any questions, by all means, jump in. I am happy to pause so that we can have a chat. Okay, so if you're on social media, you probably have been seeing a lot of memes with red flags over the past maybe month or few weeks. And I want to talk to you about the myth of the red flag, because oftentimes people will say things like, abusive relationships have red flags. Pay attention to this thing or that thing. And the truth of the matter is, from where I sit, the red flag in abusive relationships is actually a bit of a myth, because flags do not start off red. When you meet someone for the first time, they don't start off by calling you names. They don't start off by putting you down. They don't start off by hitting you in the face or punching you in the stomach, or all the other ways in which you can be abused. If that were the case, you would never be in relationships, because no one looks for a relationship that is abusive. And so when you are starting a relationship, when you just start to date someone, when you finally, you're 17 years old and you meet someone who is lovely, all of the flags start off green. They portray themselves as someone to be trusted. They portray themselves as someone who has your back. They portray themselves as someone who would always protect you, would always treat you like gold, right? And then after a little while, and depending on the person, depending on the relationship, it can look like a little while can look like a few days, a little while can look like a few weeks, or a little while can look like a few months, right? For some people, it can even be years. where the flags do not start off red. The flags start off green. And then after a while, the flags, I like to say the flags get pink, right? They things start to change a little bit. Your partner starts talking to you with a little bit more of an aggressive tone, or they say, "Don't you know how to do that?" Or they start saying things like, "Don't be ridiculous," or "You didn't handle the money the way I thought you would." But things just don't seem as lovely as they used to seem. And very shortly after the flag gets pink, it becomes red. And that's when abusive behavior starts to happen. That's when they start to put you down and yell at you and scream at you in public and call you names and, even hurt you or hurt your loved ones or hit you. And so sometimes people will say things like, "You didn't pay attention to the red flags in the relationship." And I just want to call that out, because when you start relationships, flags don't start off red. They eventually change as the relationship goes on. I can't tell you how many people that I've spoken to who said the relationship was fine and then we moved in together, or the relationship was fine and then I relocated to Ottawa with them, or the relationship was fine and then I got pregnant. The relationship was fine and then the baby was born, or I lost my job, or they had an accident and they lost their job, or they lost the ability to do their job. And then the flag starts to change. So it's very important all throughout the course of your relationship that, I don't want you to treat your relationships as something that will always become abusive, but you want to keep your eyes open. You always want to be aware of how your partner is treating you in your relationship when you're dating, in your relationship when you're married, in your relationship, even when you are separating, because that can happen. The flags can turn red when you begin to separate, right? So I want you to always be aware, always be mindful of how people treat you. All right. So let's talk about keeping yourself safe. In the next coming sessions, we'll get into this in more detail, but I want to talk to you a little bit about the brain and gut connection. I don't want to get into too many sort of biological details, but science has now shown that there's actually a nerve that runs from the back of your brain down into behind your stomach. And that's where the phrase "a gut feeling," that's where that comes from, right? Have you ever been in a situation and you couldn't tell exactly what was going on, but you just got an uneasy feeling in the pit of your stomach? Has that ever happened to you? If that's happened to you, I want you to put a 1 in the chat. If that's happened to you, where you've been in a situation where you have felt inside yourself, inside your gut, that there's something not right that's happening here, right? That is your body that is trying to keep you safe. And I want you to start to be in tune with your body. I want you to start listening to that gut sensation. I want you to start listening to that message from your body that you are not safe. So if you are in a relationship and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, your partner starts putting you down and you start to get that feeling within yourself, listen to yourself, because it is going to always, your body will always try to keep you safe. I want you to pay attention to the pink flags in your relationship. These are the flags that haven't yet turned red. But if you are in a relationship that seems to be a safe and loving one, and all of a sudden you are the target of the joke, all of a sudden you are the butt of the jokes, all of a sudden you can't do anything right, all of a sudden they're always picking arguments with you, and you are being blamed for all the things. You're the reason that we're late. You're the reason I didn't get the job. You're the reason my mom isn't talking to me. You're the reason I got that D in chemistry. If these things are always happening, then it is time to think about, how can I keep myself safe? Another way to keep yourself safe is to do your best to prevent social isolation. That means if you are dating and your partner suddenly says, I don't like your friends, you need to stop talking to them. That's a huge pink flag to be aware of. If you are in a relationship and your partner says, why are you always checking in with your mom? You need to stop checking in with your mom. When you're with me, you're with me. That is another huge pink flag that you need to pay attention to. These are methods of social isolation. Social isolation doesn't always mean that you move out to the country with them, right? Social isolation doesn't always mean that you quit your job to be with them, right? It also means pulling you away from your social circle, pulling you away from your education. Why you gotta study so hard? I don't study that hard. None of my friends study that hard. Forget the books. Let's go hang out. That's a kind of isolation as well. And so I want you to be aware of those things. I want you to talk to people who believe you. That's another huge way of keeping yourself safe. When you are feeling, what's the word? When you're having these red flags, when you're having these pink flags, and you're not quite sure what to do, and you disclose this to someone who says, oh, it's all in your head. I don't want you to stop there. I want you to keep disclosing to other people that you feel safe to disclose with until you find the person who believes you. Otherwise, you will start to second guess yourself. You will start to discredit your own thoughts. Is this actually true? Is this actually real? Am I dreaming this? Am I imagining this? You know within yourself that you're not imagining it. But if other people disagree with, maybe this relationship is abusive, if other people disagree with, maybe they're putting me down, then you will start to second guess yourself. And when you second guess yourself, it's impossible to keep yourself safe because you cannot tell now when you're in danger. When you second guess yourself, you begin to stop believing your own thoughts. And when your mind or your gut is telling you that you are in danger, you don't listen to it or you don't believe it, and it puts you at greater risk. It puts you in harm's way. So talk to people who believe you. The other thing too is believe other people when they share. You become one of those people who will believe others, right? When people start to share their thoughts about, I wonder if this relationship is abusive. When people start to say, such and such is starting to put me down and it makes me feel really uncomfortable. They're calling me fat and unattractive, and I really don't like that. They are encouraging their friends to put me down and laugh at me. When I hang out with them at college or university and their friends put me down, they don't stand up for me. When people tell you these things, I want you to believe them. People rarely lie about these things. They rarely misrepresent the truth. And so it is, it's important, just in the same way that you would like for someone to believe you, I want you to try to be a support for someone else and believe them when they share this information and try to get them the support that they need. Whether it's, just Googling some resources online, how to help someone who's in an abusive relationship. Even if they're 16 years old, you can still help them access support. The other thing too, so back to the other point that I just made, believe yourself, right? Back to that gut connection, that personal inference inside of you that says there's something wrong here. Don't just toss it away and think to yourself, well, I'm just imagining that. Don't just toss it away and say, well, they bought me ice cream last night, so that can't be true. When you are starting to have doubt, I want you to pay attention to that doubt. Ask yourself, is this actually true? were they actually joking, or did I feel really badly when they were laughing, right? Were their friends actually making fun of me, or am I actually overthinking it, like they said? You know, am I really stupid, like they said? No one deserves to speak to you. Don't deserve for anyone to speak to you that way. And so when you start to feel uncomfortable in these relationships, I want you to believe your gut when it tells you that this is not good for you, and do what you can to keep yourself safe. All right. So I want to open the floor for any questions and discussion, any discussion points that you might have. I really want to open the floor so we can talk about this, because this is something that is not talked about openly. This is not something that is talked about on social media. This is not something that we see on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook. This is not something that we see in most television shows. You might see it here or there, but most television shows, we don't see this. What we do hear about is, we hear about every once in a while on the news that such and such died at the hands of their partner. And so I bring this up to share the gravity of the situation. It is not enough for us to just brush this off and say, you know, it's not that serious. It's not enough for us to brush this off and say, oh, they don't need help, right? My mind goes back to a physician in Ontario. I believe that the wife was a family doctor, and I believe her husband was a surgeon. And she died because of his treatment towards her. He actually killed her and tried to dispose of her remains. And so I don't say this to shock you, but I say this for you to be aware that that these things happen in our society, and not just to married people. It happens to young individuals who are in intimate relationships as well. So I want you to keep your eyes open. All right, I will take a breath. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and jump in, or type any questions that you might have in the chat.
Thank you, Roxanne.
You're welcome.
And we'll just wait until someone says, send a question in the chat box. I think I have a question myself.
Yeah, sure.
So you talked about the different types, and then and what would be the tool if someone comes to us, that come to me and, hey, I'm being abused, what would be my first approach or appropriate approach for her?
The first approach is to believe her when she comes and says, the first thing, believe her when she says, I'm in an abusive relationship. The second thing that I would say is, try to ensure your safety as well. Don't go with her to stand up to the person who is causing the abuse. You don't want to be putting yourself in harm's way. You want to find out if there's anyone else who knows, whether or not she might have family that might be supportive. The other thing, like if they're in a situation where they're cohabitating, we need to find out a safe way. Are they ready to leave the relationship, right? A lot of times when people hear someone come forward with being in an abusive relationship, the first thought is, well, you need to leave. And sometimes leaving isn't always the safest option. So we need to build a plan, build a safety plan, build an exit plan, so this person can leave the relationship safely. If they need supports doing that, there are shelters all across Ontario, all across the country of Canada, where we are, where this person can stay until they are able to find safe and secure housing away from this person. There are a lot of these agencies have been funded by the government to offer people clothing, if they have to leave everything behind to find safety, you're fed, you're clothed, you're housed until the agency is able to help you get on your feet, whether that means finding work or getting back to your family. But there is support available. The first thing that we need to do is believe, stay safe, and help them create a plan. You might want to find out if they're interested in having police involved. Just because they're abused doesn't mean that everyone wants to have police involved. Mind you, I might be of the bias, or I might be of the opinion that it might be within your best interest to have police involved, but that is a personal decision. So just be mindful that not everyone wants to have that police involvement. I do have some more details on that I wanted to share, but that's going to be on the third installment of this talk, just in terms of some of some more detail around what to do when you leave.
Thank you. Thank you
You're
so much.
welcome.
I think I have just a follow-up question. There's a lot of cases where people are unable to leave or not ready at all. What would be the best way to support them?
The best way to support them is to let them know that you are there, to let them know that the door is open. If you are in a close friendship with someone who's in an abusive relationship, you want to encourage them, if they feel safe enough to do so, to call 911 as needed. You want to talk to them about how to surf the web securely, how to clear the cache on the internet so that the abuser can't see the supports that they may be looking for online. Let's see, another thing, we have to learn, we have to build an exit plan. So what that means is, if you are in a physically abusive relationship and you're not ready to leave, you want to, as a friend to that person, you'll want to help them, whether that's pack a bag with 1 or 2 days worth of clothing, have some cash in an envelope stored in that bag, and maybe they can stash that bag at your house or in the trunk of your car, so that if something should ever happen and they need to take off with, no wallet, no shoes, that they're able to do so. You might want to encourage them to see if they can safely get their identifications photocopied, in case they should have to more or less sort of run for their lives, right? Another thing too is, you want to consider whether or not you might be available by phone at any hour of the night, because that person may need to talk to you at 2 o'clock in the morning. That person may need support at 4 o'clock in the morning, at 7 o'clock in the evening at dinner time. And if you are not available, or if you know that you're in class, or you have your own children, or you're at work and you can't, then let's create a network of friends where someone will be able to pick up at some point, right? If one person is unable to do so. But it is really, really, really important to build that support network, so that when the time comes when you do need support, or when it is time for you to leave, that you're able to do so in a safe manner.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If there's anyone with a question, we'll just leave the floor open for about 13 minutes.
And I also wanted to share that there are multiple agencies in the community who offer counseling at either low cost or no cost. You might have to wait on a wait list for a little while, but there are definitely agencies out there that are willing to either help you to create a plan, or are willing to listen to your story and help you to get to a place where you're a place in your walk where you're actually ready to leave. A lot of times society blames individuals, society blames women when they're just not ready to leave a relationship. And again, statistics show that it takes 4 or 5 attempts to leave before we actually leave for good. So people leave and then they go back. And they leave and then they go back. And that's general for multiple reasons, right? Financial supports, having a roof over your head, actually being physically safe, because sometimes when you leave, again, that's the most dangerous time. So it's important to recognize those things, that people don't just leave for good all at once.
That's very true. So we have Ernest Frenier, who said that he didn't have any questions, and I hope it's a he said that it was a great information that was being discussed, and he appreciated you sharing this with us.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
What are the tips maybe you can give to young men or young women who cannot demystify if it's abuse or not?
Mm-hmm.
What would be probably 3 pointers that you can really give them that can rely on?
Yeah, because abuse exists in so many different forms, right? Even if you feel like you're not in an abusive relationship, if you're in a relationship where the person continually makes you feel uncomfortable, then you may need to reevaluate that. If you are constantly feeling being put down, then you may want to reevaluate that. And by reevaluate, I mean consider leaving, consider ending the relationship, because one of the things to pay attention to is what it is that you deserve, how it is that you would treat someone else if you were in a relationship. So again, if you are always the butt of the joke, if you are always being laughed at, if you're always being put down, if you are being shoved in any way, if you are being intimidated or made to feel small or not protected. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're hanging out with your partner and their friends are around and they're all having lunch and the friends are making fun of you and the partner doesn't stand up for you. The partner doesn't say, hey, cut that out, or ask them to stop, or suggest that the both of you get up and leave. Then, and again, these are some of the pink flags that are important for you to pay attention to. Other flags are the isolation piece, having them, when they pull you away from your friends, when they pull you away from your family, when they think that you talk to too many people, when they're telling you how to behave, when they're telling you how to dress, you laugh too much, why is that skirt so short? Why are you wearing heels? You're wearing too much makeup. A lot of these things are attempts at controlling individuals, and that piece of control, that nugget of control, is a very, very big one, and something to really pay attention to when you are in relationships. If you feel like you're being controlled, then it is something that you need to really look at seriously and consider, is this something that I want? Is this relationship something that I want?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Just to remind everyone that this session can be found on YouTube as soon as we finished, and it's being recorded live on Facebook Live.
Mm-hmm. I'm just going to exit my screen. And if anyone has any thoughts or questions, I think it's really important to have this talk, because again, it's not being talked about. and young people, particularly young people, are finding themselves in relationships where they're shocked when this is happening and they don't know what to do. And so they're stunned or shocked into silence and they just accept it. And then before you know it, they become abused individuals. And we don't want this. We don't want this happening to our women. We don't want this happening to anyone in our society. So I think it's really, really good that we have this platform so we can share this information.
It is indeed, and then I don't know if people had the occasion to see, but since COVID and the lockdown, a lot of cases were reported, and
yes.
I can imagine there is way much more that are not being reported due to shame and denial. So it is a very, very important presentation we're having today.
Yes. Yeah. You know, to your point about what you said regarding COVID-19, abusive relationships have always been around, unfortunately. But before the pandemic, many people were able to leave their partner and engage in other things in society. If it was happening within the confines of the home, then people were able to leave and go to work. People were able to leave and go to school. If it was happening with someone that you were dating at university or high school, then you were able to leave that situation and go back to your dorm, or leave that situation and go back to your house. And with COVID-19, people were now under the same roof a lot. And they were unable to step away. They were unable to engage in other things that brought them joy. And it just brought them within close proximity to the abuser pretty much 24/7. And so it caused the rates to skyrocket. And you know, because of the lockdown, people had very little place to go. And other community agencies that used to provide resources, that used to provide groups for people, we couldn't do that in person anymore. And that started to become, well, let's do it online. Well, I can't attend a group for people who are abused online if I'm online at home with the person who's abusing, right? So it became very, very challenging and very, very unsafe for a lot of people.
That's very true. I can understand how it would work. It's a very complicated situation.
Very much so, very much.
So if we don't have any more questions, I'm probably going to conclude. Thank you so much, Roxanne, for this presentation and sharing your personal experience as well. And I hope that it was informative to each and every one of you who participated. And we thank you again for being here. Or maybe if you have a website to share or where they can find you.
Yes, I will just put it in the chat.
Thank you. And then I would just like to remind the people that we have one-on-one counseling available. I have Future Black Female for the Black female youth aged from 16 to 22, anywhere in Canada. You just have to head on our website, and I'll put it in the group chat, everyone in the chat box.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Eve.
Thank you. Okay, just add the link and we'll keep it quick. All right, and then it is the same username for on Facebook and Instagram.
Yes.
Oh, okay, perfect. All right. Just give it 2 minutes so everyone can probably ready somewhere. Okay, so thank you again, Roxanne.
You're welcome.
I hope everyone had a great session, and I wish you guys a great evening or afternoon, whatever it's the time zone. And thank you so much, and I'll probably end it right now.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.